Living in America as a Black person, you recognize there is one set of laws for you and one set of laws for those, especially in the white community. In our book, Passive Aggressive Racism in the System of White Supremacy, I take you through times in my life when I first started noticing white supremacy. We teach you how to recognize it, identify it, and also counter it in our book. This book is a beginner's course for those that are just starting to wake up and open their eyes to see the system of white supremacy. As a Black American person, you must understand this system because this system is life or death to you. How you handle it, how you deal with it, it can affect your mental health if you don't understand this system. Pick up our book, Passive Aggressive Racism and the System of White Supremacy, today on Amazon. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, today we have Kim Heller here as a guest. Now, maybe if you saw, I had done a report on her speaking out about some of the things that is wrong, in South Africa. I remember when I told a lot of you that some things kind of saddened me that I heard in South Africa. Some things like saying the term Black-owned business, it freaked me out to hear that term. But as people explained to me the history of what happened in 1994, how the economy really didn't switch to Black people. Kim was speaking out about a lot of things that go on in South Africa, and she has a book called No White Lies. So Kim, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much. I feel very honored to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so Kim, for people that don't know much about you, could tell people just a little bit, about yourself? Because, like I said, when I saw what you were saying, I say, well, we have to get this guest on the show.
Thank you. Well, I'm a writer, I'm an author, and I'm a political analyst in South Africa. And although a lot of the mainstream media in this country don't invite me very often because the views that I speak are not compatible with what I call the master narrative in South Africa, a narrative that despite so-called liberation in this country in 1994 is owned and controlled by white people. But often when I speak, I describe myself as a foreigner, as an unwelcome guest on land that my forefathers stole, because South Africans were never welcomed into South Africa. What we did in 3 centuries ago was to come uninvited into this place and to steal and plunder from Black people. And although we are now in a so-called democratic South Africa, the economic power remains in the hands of whites. And I've done a lot of talks recently about the fact that there's so much, and I'm not sure if you saw it when you were in South Africa yourself, there's so much antagonism between Black South Africans and Black Africans from other parts of the continent. We have terrible xenophobia at the moment, or Afriphobia, where Black brothers and sisters are turning on Black brothers and sisters from the continent as if they are the problem for the deep economic inequality and patterns of Black poverty we see in this country, where in truth, the real problem remains white supremacy. So what I write about in my book, and it's been a very popular read for some, but a very unwelcome read for others, is the fact that although we speak about a Black government and a new Black South Africa, that's not true. What we have is a society caught in the clutch of whiteness. Every single sphere of our country is dominated by whites, including the cultural sphere. So Black people actually have succumbed almost to Black culture, to an economy that is completely held in white hands. So little has changed. So whilst economic freedom is a flag that we can lift up and celebrate, the dignity of the Black child and the well-being of a Black child in South Africa today remains as if they are second-rate citizens. And white people, and I don't exempt myself from that class, that category of person, we are treated like squires in a land that we stole from Black people. And that is the uncomfortable truth about South Africa in its current form.
Okay, now I want to definitely go down a few routes. You said that a lot of times you aren't invited on the mainstream media platforms because of your message. What part of your message makes them afraid?
Well, I think that we've tried to create the sense that we are a reconciled nation, but I argue that we can't unequal partners can't reconcile, because all 1994 brought, the so-called freedom in South Africa, is that Black people had to reconcile with their poverty and white people with their privilege. And I speak about the fact that the ANC government, what they've done, and it's such a tragedy, is they've cemented Black poverty in this country and white wealth as if it was a natural phenomenon rather than a monstrosity of apartheid and white supremacy. And that is tragic, because in years to come, the children of our children are going to believe that the Black man and woman is by nature poor, and that the white wealth that we see in this country is how it should be. And that is a terrible legacy for the ANC. And it hurts me. I'm not speaking from the perspective of not having once had belief in the ANC government. I used to be an avid ANC supporter. But what I've had to reconcile myself with is that the ANC government is more interested in looking after white interests than the Black majority. And what I argue in my book is that reconciliation in 1994 in this country was a white man's medicine that has harmed Black people, that has put Black liberation way out of sight. And you've seen it yourself. Black people are forced to live in the most congested, almost concentration camps of poverty, where white wealth is excessive. There has not been any shift, or very little shift, in the economic landscape in South Africa since 1994.
Yeah, that, when I started asking people questions and going to certain businesses, and they told me, well, who actually owns the businesses, but Black people are working there, who's actually owning. Even when I went to Cape Town, and they pointing out to me, oh, well, the people from Qatar is buying this, people from, Britain is buying that, all these different other countries that's coming in buying everything. But I'm like, okay, what about the people here? And they're like, oh no, the people really can't, afford that, because they put in dire straits. So from what I gathered is that in 1994, it's like political power went to, Black folks, but white people kept the economy. Am I accurate saying that?
That's exactly correct. And I do remember watching your clip, and I thought actually that is a video that should be circulating a lot in South Africa, because I think you really nailed it, and you spoke to people who confirmed the situation, that that economic liberation has not happened in this country. And I used to think that possibly that was just because the ANC government perhaps was slightly naive or trusting. But what I'm beginning to realize or believe is that the ANC government, it was by design that whiteness continued to rule. It's as if the tender of whiteness has continued, because the preservation of white economic power at the expense of Black people still exists. So I refer to this country not as a country, but as a colony, because that is what it is. The country is still in the worship of whiteness, in the curtsy of whiteness. And the issue really, and I'm not sure what you saw, because I would love to share more of your experiences, because you were here as a on the ground, and you saw much. But what is really the situation is that the boot of white supremacy is really strangling people. And I don't believe that Black people have had a breath of freedom or dignity. And that, it's just tragic. I believe that nothing is going to shift in this country until the mind shifts from a consciousness of reconciliation to one of true Black consciousness, possibly using the doctrine of Steve Biko, who was the greatest leader I think we've had in this country, and looking at like a Malcolm X equivalent in the States. But at the moment, Black people are still, I think, too tolerant of whiteness. They still believe that white people would change. And yet we've seen across the world, white oppressors have never shown any mercy. And I ask a very difficult question in my book. I say, do white people in South Africa have a moral conscience? Because if we did, we would have returned stolen land. We wouldn't ignore the patterns of deep poverty that is actually of our making. We walk past that as if it has got nothing to do with us, but it's got everything to do with us. So I think we're in a sad state, actually.
Well, just my observations, right? Just being there is that, and coming from just Black America, we've always fought racism, white supremacy, even though we are not the majority. We have stood toe to toe, against the devil himself, right? I mean, you know this, you know our history. And our question has always been, if Black people are the majority in South Africa, why is that even allowed? Because how I feel about it, I know if we were the majority, let's say in South Africa, Black Americans, and how we think, oh, that's not about to go down. Because no, I say, how is it that I'm going to live in poverty and you over there living good? Man, I'm going over there, I'm going to take what you got. Like I made a video the other day talking about what you were speaking about, attacking other brothers and sisters from the continent. I say, y'all need to take that same energy and deal with white supremacy. That's dealing, and then after y'all deal with white supremacy, then y'all can talk about everything else that you're talking about. Because I know just from history that white supremacy needs a permanent Black underclass, right? And they're good at divide and conquer. So the same people that you saying, oh, they're going against each other, I guarantee you will always find the white supremacist somewhere behind the scenes saying, you better than him, he's better than you, and then stir the divide and conquer. Do you agree with that?
So completely. In fact, I think what you just said is the question and the answer, and could be a debate that is had. It's probably the most important question that could be asked. And the answer is that Black unity in South Africa is not in place. In fact, I think I speak in my book about Black disunity being the teething gel of white supremacy, and it's deliberate. I mean, the fact is, what's fascinating, in our last election, there were 46 political parties, I think, Black political parties, but only 2 parties that represented white interests, and people were celebrating democracy. But when you look at that state, you wonder, why would there be 46 parties to represent Black people? If that could be amalgamated into one formation, that would be power. But the level of disunity which you point to is exactly what is the problem, and it's orchestrated by whiteness. But I also speak in my book and about the power of the mind, and I do say that the most problematic thing in South Africa is not that white people occupy the land or the economic sector or the stock exchange, but that whites occupy the minds of Black people. Because whiteness is still held up in this country, perhaps not by the younger generation, and that's where there's some hope, but by most of the people as the state to be. So what we have with many Black people in this country still is that they aspire to be white. And that's a big thing to say, and I may be criticized for that. But that white affirmation is more important than Black consciousness. So to be accepted by a white person still has more equity than to be part of the Black community. And I'm making a sweeping generalization, but that is true in my view. And until that is shifted, it's a consciousness. We are living with a warped consciousness in this country, where white people have shown no remorse. So they're stuck in this I am a superior being mentality. But the tragedy is that a lot of Black people still believe that white people are superior. So we've never dealt properly with the mental trauma of colonialism and apartheid on the mind of a Black person. And I've said in many interviews that I just wish that Black people would not expect anything from white people. And they still cling to the possibility that they can work together with white people to achieve a democratic nation. And white people have showed no will. So all the efforts for reconciliation in this country have come from Black people, but they've come to naught. And I remember reading, when I was preparing some research for another book, there was a missionary called Albert Schweitzer, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who did a lot of travels in Africa. And he said, the Black man or the African man is my brother, but he's my junior brother. And what's happening in South Africa is that Black people are acting as if they are junior partners in the relationship. They are accommodating themselves in white businesses, in media slots. They may be the faces, but they don't have the power. And until Black people realize that they need to transform rather than find accommodation in a white system, nothing's going to change.
Well, let me respond to a lot of that, because you said a mouthful. My experience of going to South Africa, of course, I speak more so to younger people. So the younger people kind of feel how I feel about some things. It's like, listen, we need to, get in a position. We don't need to have, white folks running everything, and so that's kind of like what I was getting from people, maybe a certain generation, because even in America, we have a certain generation that we complain about, like the older generation that's kind of fine with the go along and get along with definitely the white liberal here in America. They are more so on just, well, let's pray about it. So one thing I can understand, the Black world got the same problem all over the world. Anything that slavery, colonization has touched, it has affected Black folks completely. It has. I said that the only way Black people can actually get over that, we probably need 1,000-year separation from each other, just so Black people can heal and get out of the dependence on white supremacy and do for themselves. Because as long as, white mommy and daddy is there, some Black folks just not going to break out of that. Then you have the image of white Jesus, which, that has a major effect on Black folks. And if you look at all the Black people that's been really revolutionary for the most part, or even the ones in South Africa that I've seen, they're not toting around white Jesus, are they?
I think what you're saying is so important, and I'm smiling because actually it just feels like we've had so many conversations about this. And I do hope that when you are here next, you do come and spend some time with me, and we can explore these conversations further. But what you're saying is so correct, and it's actually almost, I do believe that there's a lot of hope in the younger generation, but I think there needs to be a sense, Steve Biko, who's, I'm not sure how in the States, if you're so familiar with his work, but he was a Black consciousness leader who was assassinated, as many leaders were in this country when their doctrine threatened white interests. And he said, Black man, you are on your own. And that's exactly correct. And until that is understood, nothing is going to shift. And the younger generation is less tolerant. I had the great privilege and learnings to be part of the economic freedom fighters movement in South Africa. It's the third biggest political party, and it's run by Julius Malema, who left the ANC and started a formation that's doing very well. And it's a party that's very resonant amongst young people, and they're taking up the causes of young Black people in this country. And I think there is some hope in formations like that, and the Black Land, Black First movement. But it's so impossible to almost assert Blackness in this country. For instance, the Black Land First movement was formed, it was a political party that refused to have white members. And then constitutionally, they were not able to participate in the election because it was said you cannot have a political party that excludes whites. So I often think in South Africa, which is a Black country, there's no space for Black voices, actually, without the watchtower of whiteness that a political party can't say, we need the space to be black without white supervision, without a white voice, and they're not allowed to do that because of the Constitution. That is the reality. So that's why I was saying earlier in the interview, unless the consciousness shifts to say this is enough, it's untenable to always be under the tutelage of whiteness, under the supervision of whiteness. And you may have seen a lot of businesses where the whites still owned the company. But there's often a sense amongst black people of my age that unless there's a white person there, it's not going to succeed. And it's a terrible mentality. So I often think that, the fact that white people think they're superior, it's not going to change. It's something that is a sickness, a terminal illness amongst white people. But when I see some black people actually agreeing with that doctrine, that actually maybe white people are superior, it's shocking. And I think that does exist. It's an ugly thing to say, but it does exist in South Africa. And there's a beautiful book by an African-American called Dr. Tim Burrell, and he says demystifying the myth of black inferiority. And I've read that book many times, and he speaks about how white people for centuries were actually mastered the art of white supremacy. It was they did it so well. But what's happening now in America and beyond is that they've taken that baton and given it to black people, and black people have actually carried on the race and literally finished off the race on behalf of whiteness. And in South Africa, I think there has been a co-option of certain black people into the system, so that white people no longer have to be doing the oppression. They have security guards protecting their interests, and those people are black. And I think any system of white supremacy works on the basis of co-option of black people. Mm-hmm. And that's a conversation. In fact, I had a discussion with that on another American channel, and they found my view problematic because
hold on. What American? Okay, who are you interviewing with? A black person or a white person?
It was a black person who said, "I'm now putting the culpability on black people for their own oppression."
Well, but let me respond to that. Okay, they've always been black people that sold out other black people for a long time, whether it's in slavery, other black people assisting the white supremacists, even all the way up until now. You look in America, we have a black political class that assists white supremacy and doing nothing for black folks at all. They do nothing for us, but they prioritize everybody that white supremacy wants to prioritize, right? You say South Africa, same thing. White supremacy cannot oppress nobody without cooperation with the people in that said group. That's why if you study the Haitian Revolution in 1804, the first thing the Haitians did to get the French out was to go after the sellouts first and deal with the sellouts first. Then once they dealt with the sellouts, then you deal with the French. And that's what black folks, have to do globally. Because the problem with you discussing is a global problem with black folk. Any place that racism, white supremacy touch, it has oppressed and definitely messed up the minds of black folk, right? Because you're right, it is more mental than anything, because you're 90% of the population and you letting what? How what's the white population? What, 9, 10%?
Yes.
8%?
Yes, that's correct.
8%?
I think it's in that region. I think it's around 10%.
Okay. You letting 10% of the population run you, literally. 10% of the population tell you how it's going to be or whatever. They're ruling from a minority position. And it should not even be that way. So when you mentioned earlier Julius Malema, which over here in the States, Malema is a celebrated figure here, right? Mm-hmm. I love the brother Julius Malema, right? Mm-hmm. I was disappointed that he wasn't elected president. I was disappointed but I knew Malema scared global white supremacy. Because, oh, hell no, Malema. So they was going to try to do everything they can to make sure that Malema was not elected. Now, the same problem I'm hearing even from other black people in South Africa
is what we have here in America. The older generation, those that are a little older than the Gen Xers and the millennials and the Gen Zs. We're talking about those that go back to that civil rights generation. We say in America, those in the 1960s, 1950s, that generation right there. Because you got a section of kids now in South Africa that don't know a day of apartheid. They know nothing. So I think those kids is the one that y'all need to invest in and move it on, right? But let me ask you a question. Your ancestors, or the majority of white ancestors, come from the Netherlands, correct?
In my particular case,
your ancestors come from the Netherlands.
Not in my case, but I think most white current South Africans have their roots in the Netherlands. I think that would be the main gene pool. Yes, correct.
Okay. So the question I have is, because you recently, there was a story about that particular pastor that was trying to do a terrorist attack against Black people. You remember that story?
Yes.
The white pastor? Okay. So yes. I said in the comment section, I said a while back that if you don't like Black people, okay, why can't you return back to your homeland in the Netherlands? And I said that even years ago, and I had got a long email from a woman from the Netherlands explaining to me how they don't want the white people in South Africa to come back. So the question I have is, why is that?
Well, I can't really speak on behalf of that individual, but actually, what's quite interesting is that when Jan van Riebeeck arrived here in 1652,
okay,
with his Dutch party. I mean, it was part of a conquering of the seas and trade routes. A lot of the people that came here in the first place, white people, were not upper class, educated people. In some cases, they were criminals. In some places, they were people that could not get jobs in that country. So. And the irony is that those people then became landowners, very wealthy and supported by the state. And still today, the privilege of those days is reflective in the social economic patterns that we see in South Africa. So they were almost the dregs of society. They weren't the cream of society. So that perhaps in answer to that question, that's what I can offer.
Okay, so basically, it's kind of like the situation with America, like the worst of the British crown came over here to America. That's basically the same story.
Actually, in objective, factual, historical terms, that is the case of whites coming to South Africa. So, and also perhaps people in the Netherlands and in that part of Europe, I don't think they would tolerate the levels of blatant racism that the average white person in South Africa still exhibits.
Yeah, because when I was there, I had a guy that was a driver explain to me what how Nelson Mandela, how basically he was waging guerrilla warfare on the white supremacists at that time period. And I was like interested. I was like, man, there's still some good stories. They talking about how Nelson Mandela was. Now the guy you saw in '94, I'm talking about Nelson Mandela was, he was the man. But he ended up saying that, oh, well, the country was a lot better during apartheid. And I looked at the guy and I'm like, it wasn't good for Black folk. What you mean it was good for back? It was better when they ran it. I mean, when Black people was like oppressed? So that's what the question I have. If you feel like the country was better during apartheid, why can't you leave? Why won't they leave?
Well, there's a dialogue, and I think it's being spread by the very white political parties and white interests. The notion of the country being better under apartheid. As much as we are critical of the government now, it can never be the case, because in apartheid, a Black man couldn't even walk in certain areas. A Black woman was just subject to the worst possible abuse. There was no dignity. They were called boys and girls. at least theoretically, that's not happening. So there has been a restoration of some dignity and some rights. But I think the point is that Black people haven't asserted their rights fully. They're still acting as junior partners. And it's interesting that you speak about Nelson Mandela's earlier speeches. I was going through a book that he had written of his before he was president, of what he used to say, what he said at his Rivernia trial. And he was extremely Black consciousness. And I think he and other leaders became diluted as they realized that the forces of power in this country were leaning towards whiteness, white power. And perhaps there was some kind of compromise that was far too much. Perhaps it's deliberate, as I was saying. But certainly things are better today. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the Black person is still, in my view, a second-rate citizen in this country who doesn't get equal access to justice, to cultural expression. I mean, as a white person, I was saying when I was invited to a university to do a lecture, there were about 200 people. And I think there must have been a sprinkling of white people in the audience, mostly Black people, mostly scholars and academics. But everybody had to speak in English because I was there. The lack of speaking of African languages and there's the assertion of cultural richness of African society is still not on the main stage in South Africa at the moment. It's white values, white economy, white man first. In fact, South Africa today, we call it the Rainbow Nation, but it's a white wonderland. It's a wasteland of Black economic liberation, but it's a wonderland for whiteness. And that's very sad because you would assume that white supremacy had died, but all I'm seeing is that it has been supersized and is very much in play in what we call a free South Africa.
Well, from my view of going to South Africa, and I live, like I said, I live in Babylon, literally. South Africa is nothing like America. I have to say that up front, just honestly. I didn't feel threatened like I do in America. Mm-hmm. Everything isn't so, you have so many groups against you in America as a Black person. I mean, you constantly literally at war, right? At least in South Africa, you got, dealing with basically one system to the point. And they do have, the numbers. And I've seen a lot of opportunity in South Africa just as a Black American. But as a Black American, I also bring a certain attitude in my engagement with them. So what I've noticed just in my travels is that white people in Africa, when they see someone like me and they hear me speak and how I respond to them, they some of them have did this a little bit, or they say, oh, shoot, kind of like that. Because even in Kenya, that happened. I was in Kenya and I went to Kibera, and they were pissing me off because I saw two white females walking around with a Black dude, which he pissed me off too, taking pictures of the people, this poverty porn stuff they like to do. And I just looked at them while they was doing it, and they noticed I was looking at them, and they literally got petrified. And then the other sister that was with me, African Tigers at the time, she's a YouTuber, she said, why did they look like that when they saw you? They got scared of you all of a sudden. Like, they were looking like, oh, shoot, like that. And I say, because they know who we are. I'll say by the look. So maybe you can explain that. Why white folks in African countries that I've seen, what's the difference with us versus an African that you have seen in a response?
I think that's very different, because also you must realize in South Africa and generally in the African continent, anything that is product, a person, a book, a television program from America is elevated. So it's a culture that is respected and revered in this country. And also perhaps because you are very assertive and confident in who you are, which is not generally the disposition of most Black people in South Africa. But we're seeing your attitude in the youth, and that's a beautiful thing to see, where there's a proud sense of, I'm Black and I'm proud of that. But, I think that the South African system is not overtly as violent, perhaps, as what we see in America. It's the covert things, the racism that's hidden behind a white smile. You know, that white smile is a very dangerous thing, because white people tend to act friendly in South Africa, but yet they hold on to all the power, and it's in that there's violence. The fact that a black mother has to wait 3 days perhaps for her infant to be looked after, where white people have access to better services. You know, that's the violence of every day. But I don't think I think the dynamics are very different to what you have in America. And I think in some situations, it must be worse. I recall speaking to an academic friend of mine, a black South African man, who was in Washington, I think at Howard University. And we were having a chat, and he suddenly screamed. And I panicked, and it wasn't so long ago. And I called him back. He called me back about 10 minutes later to say policemen had just attacked him for nothing, because he was just walking, speaking on his cell phone in an area that apparently he looked suspicious. So I think you have a dynamic there that is so violent and so inhumane that I'm not seeing to that extent in South Africa. But what we have in South Africa is the whole system, rather than expression. The system is fundamentally racist, so that it works against the black person 24 hours a day. But we don't perhaps have your overt level of attack. And I do, you know, we do see the terrible things that are going on in America, and it's really shocking.
Well, you know, coming from this system, and yes, I've talked to the people, and basically everything you saying is kind of what I heard while I was there. But coming from this system, like say how violent it is, how, you know, I mean, you've seen the videos, George Floyd, many others, right? What just in just my opinion, and maybe a lot of Black Americans' opinion, some of the issues that you're talking about, what's happening with Black folks in South Africa, we viewed it as light work. We viewed it as like, oh, that's nothing to deal with. We can easily deal with that problem. It was like we had the numbers and the mindset. That's an easy fix, because if you get, let's say if Julius Malema becomes the president of South Africa, let's say that, to fix a lot of that is laws. Because I told some of my South African friends, y'all need reparations. I say, because in 1994, y'all got political power, but didn't get the economic power. Well, you know, economics control politics. You know that. So Black South Africans need reparations to close the wealth gap, to make them even with white people. Do you agree that should happen?
Well, completely. It's actually one of the aspects that I've been fighting for, but I'm very, very alone in that voice, where there was at some stage, there was a call for a white tax that every white person should pay reparations. And I've tried to drive that. In fact, I've even at some stage linked up with some American-based activists to try and push the agenda of reparations in this country, because that has to shift. And until we deal with the issue of land in this country, you know, I think 7% of land is sitting in the hands of Black people as we speak, and yet they are 90% of the population. So until land is returned, and until economic resources are redistributed, the black man, he may be in the majority, but he has no power. And I mean, we see with the ANC government, and I was at their land summit many years ago, there's no inclination to give Black people back their land. The ANC is too scared of white people to do so. It's too timid. So what we're going to see, if land is returned in this country, it's going to be unarable land that is inferior, that can never be used by Black people effectively. And as far as the economic dynamics are concerned, there's hardly any representation of Black people on the stock exchange. And when we drill down further to look at the status of Black women in South Africa, it's shocking. There's no representation. So the majority status isn't helping. But once again, I think it's located in the mind, where, and perhaps in the sense of hope that Black people still have, that reconciliation is possible, that white people will, of their own will, redistribute that wealth. But I can tell you that will not happen.
I can tell you that too. Because the thing is, I studied racism, white supremacy, and the way white supremacy works is equality is oppression to them. That's why they will never give anything. White supremacy is a doctrine of demons. It's evil. It has been practiced for a long time and it needs to end. But my hope, and this is what I've said just throughout the world, especially on the African continent, my hope is the young people. I really see the continent is going to have a fundamental change because these younger people are connected online now. They get to see more things. They're not shielded from certain knowledge that say like maybe some of the older people were at one point in time. You understand? So those younger people is where it's at. And like I said, I still believe South Africa has a lot of opportunities, a lot, like so much so that, like I said, I want to move my family there possibly because I see just so many opportunities for Black people. And, you know, I mean, if they want us to have some conversation, whatever, I'll let them know where I stand real quick, you know, and when I know how Black people are, when they see Black people stand up for themselves, they see Black people be successful, assertive, that spreads. And the other Black people like, oh yeah, shoot, I can do the same thing. So I have a lot of hope for my brothers and sisters. I think things going to turn around. I believe that.
I think what you're saying is correct, and perhaps in view of that, some of my comments tonight have possibly been focused on the older generation, and I do believe that you're correct, because we do see that things that the older generation would have not put up with, young Black people are fighting back, and let us hope that they do take on Fanon's view of, you know, what is your generational mission, and that is to try and liberate this country. But I don't see that happening in my lifetime or even yours. But to put your faith in young Black people is correct. There's some outstanding activists in this country who are making a real difference. But the system is against them. I'm not sure if you were aware a few weeks ago, there was a white student at a university in South Africa, Stellenbosch, which is predominantly Afrikaans.
Mm-hmm.
And a white student urinated,
I heard,
on the desk and laptop of a Black student. And I saw how the university, they may deny that, seemed to want a reconciliation of the two fathers, and we even had stories of the white student having a Black best friend and all that total nonsense. And that happened a few weeks ago. But now there's a commission of inquiry on racism. So to deal with those kind of episodes, we're still very slow, because the young Black student wanted to stand up very strongly against this evil act of degradation on the basis of a racial issue. But now we have commissions. I mean, in my view, if we were a progressive country, that student would be suspended and a criminal case would be charged against him. But we don't move at that pace. It's always that whiteness has to be accommodated. I mean, that's an outrageous act, which is infringing on the dignity of a Black child, and yet we don't punish it to the extent that it should be. Well, if it was the other way around.
Let me inject in there. That particular, we covered that here on this channel, actually, that particular story is because it's allowed by the Black person who it happened to. Because I know some brothers and sisters in South Africa right now. Let him urinate on their laptop. Watch what's gonna happen. He about to get a good beat down, like he should. You know, it's like, oh, I don't care about no police. I'm gonna handle that myself. There's some Black people that's on that. So unfortunately, I know what you're saying. It's like they're afraid of white folks. They don't know. You know, it's the Black world got the same issue. You can go to the Caribbean. The white folks coming to the Caribbean doing what they want to do. Even the Chinese sometimes. I've covered stories like that. The Chinese beating on Kenyan workers and doing, all kind of things. But what I found out is that when it's exposed globally and everybody's talking about it and it gets viral, all of a sudden now people getting arrested. All of a sudden investigations are happening. All of a sudden, people getting sued. So that's a beautiful thing about, the internet. Now, I haven't heard anything else about that particular story. Did that guy get suspended after all, or are they just talking about some commission?
He was suspended, but the commission is ongoing. I mean, it's as if racism is presented right in front of your eyes, but you still cannot judge on that. You still have to have a commission. And that to me is absurd. The fact that he wasn't taken to a police station and charged is a symptom of the fact that whites are still far more in charge of the society than we want to believe.
Yeah, and the brothers and sisters in South Africa got to get a handle on that, and like say, listen, I appreciate everything you saying, because I know in your community, someone like you are hated. I know you're hated to the core. Someone like you in America, they would have put a rope around your neck. Okay, every white person in history that's tried to speak up what's right, they doing the Lord's work, right? They have always been a pariah in their community and been attacked. So what have you been called in by other white people in South Africa for what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I've been apparently I'm a race traitor, and a terrible thing. I mean, I see myself as a black sheep in the white community, and it's actually a lonely journey, to be honest, because I've tried to reach out, and I think on the whole, there are very few white people who are willing to have honest discussions and to actually make material reparations. I've reached out to the CEOs of big companies in this country, and they're not interested in parting with their wealth. And as I've got older, I've learned that we speak about the politics of liberation, romantically, a great revolution and human rights and self-determination. But often politics is all about self-interest, and it's not in the interests of white people to engage morally or face up to the atrocities that they caused or their forefathers. So yes, I'm labeled. I've lost, in my book, I speak about losing many career opportunities on the basis of my politics, which is crazy. But it's a journey that has to be walked. And as long as my voice is heard, I will be speaking. But as I was saying, on mainstream channels in South Africa, my voice is very unwelcome. But I continue.
Well, don't feel bad, because my voice isn't welcome on mainstream channels either. I appreciate Newsroom Africa for having me on. Shout out to them. I don't get on too many channels myself, so don't feel bad. But it's popped in my head. I'm not gonna say the full word, but do the white people call you K-word lover?
Yes, they do that. I mean, what I find quite interesting is that, I mean, there's been a lot of insults, and it takes on an ugly nature. I mean, even sexual comments and, speaking about my character. But I'm fine. I know what I believe in, and I continue. And I certainly don't feel sorry for myself. I'm very comfortable with my views. And I mean, I still remain in South Africa as a privileged person. I'm still part of the oppressors, and I never romanticize what I'm doing. And I speak out, but the sacrifice that I'm making is minimal compared to millions of Black South Africans. So, and I never speak for Black South Africans. I'm trying to lift up the voice of white consciousness in this country. But to be quite honest, I think I'm on a cause that is never going to be achieved, because my conclusion is that white people in this country don't care about Black people at all. And history may prove me wrong, but I doubt it. So we have to go back to the view that there needs to be a shift in consciousness. And I know I've kept repeating that, but Black people have to start focusing on creating their own future as if white people did not exist.
Well, it's just my opinion, and it's not much, if it means a lot or not. I would say I wouldn't focus on changing white people, because let's call it what it is. They're stuck in their ways. I would say, you as a white person, you say you have privilege. I tell any white person, no, throughout the world, you want to assist, well, assist in dismantling white supremacy. Use your privilege to do that, because you're not going to change them. They stuck in their ways. So what ways you can use your privilege to help black people if you have it wherever you live? You understand what I'm saying? You as a white person, could you go get a loan, or could you go get some permits? Could you speak up? Could you do whatever you can do to assist black people and even helping themselves? Say, look, I'm not trying to save you or nothing. I just want to do my part while I'm still here, right? To help you just get a leg up. They got a lot of brothers and sisters in South Africa right now, right? Even if you probably go say something, they probably can get a permit, if they can get a loan. Like, those things to me are bigger at times than even just, because my message isn't to change white folk. That's not my message. My message is to the people, and say, you change, you get, focus and get, straight. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're not going to, you're going to waste your life trying to change white folk yourself when they don't even want you.
Yes, I'm glad that you see that, because we to carry on trying to change that, the mind of a white person is really virtually impossible. But I think that certainly there are some activists, white activists, who have tried to shift things and also help in the way that you're suggesting. But I don't think it's that useful. I think until we shift the system and expose that system, we won't be doing anything. Because until we expose that the enemy in South Africa is white supremacy and the system of white power, illicit white power, unearned white power, we're going to keep seeing black people turning on their African brothers and sisters and seeing the enemy where it isn't, rather than in the system itself. So I don't like groups of white people doing goodwill here and there. We have to fight the bigger fight, which is the system is contaminated with whiteness, and that has to change. And white people, as you say, are a small percentage, 10 or 13% of the population. We have to say, we need to. This country is a black country. The welfare of a black child has to come first. And if we have the privilege of being in this country, we must be almost secondary citizens until we have made that economic shift for all the centuries of white abuse and privilege, and that catch up. But it's a systemic thing. It's not an individual thing.
Well, I got one more question. I talked about this in my last video about South Africa, Afriforum. I was saying that yes. Afriforum is one of the worst things to ever happen in African soil, because they're plotting and doing things that most black folks don't know what they're doing. Now, I know you're pretty sure you're familiar with Afriforum, but do you agree that they're dangerous to be existing in South Africa?
That's such a thorny issue, and I've been on many debates with Afriforum people. Obviously, I represent one complete side of the spectrum, and they on the other side. It was so interesting. There's a very well-known breakfast host in South Africa who happens to be a black man, and I commented on him describing Afriforum as a civil rights group. I said, how can you as a black man be doing this? And then he wasn't very happy, and he blocked me on all social media platforms. But Afriforum is quite a clever organization, because we have black people speaking about them as a civil rights organization.
Jesus Christ.
And every single time a journalist does that, you'll see I've got quite a strong Twitter profile. I say, stop doing this. So that's just how contaminated the mind is, perhaps. And Afriforum, I'm going to give you a different answer to possibly what you're expecting. Afriforum is doing a great job at what it should be doing. It's protecting white interests. I often speak about them as the public protector of white interests. And they're doing a great job. And so my view is that what the question that we should be asking, or Black South Africans should be asking, is why do we not have our own Afriforum, an interest group that serves us? when there's a legal case against a Black person who's been abused, and that happens on a daily basis, we rise as Black lawyers, as Afriforum, and we support that cause above and beyond political parties' support. That when anyone is violated, they call us. But you know, the Afriforum model is very interesting, is that white people are very good at looking after their interests. So the model is that there's a subscription fee, a small amount, that white people pay each month, so that when Afriforum have to take up a white cause, there's money at hand. But Black people haven't managed to put together that forum in South Africa, and that's one of the missing ingredients. Because if they could, we've got 30 million people, and if they had to contribute a small amount to a Black-run Afriforum, it would be a paradigm-shifting exercise in this country. But because of what you said at the beginning, correctly so, the lack of Black unity in this country, we don't have a scenario like that. So when people criticize Afriforum, I say, don't criticize Afriforum, develop your own.
Well, I agree with you 2,000% that Black people should have, places they can go or different organizations. Unfortunately, we got organizations here in America, and it's not even that simple here, even though we have many of them. Some fight for us, some kind of, tiptoe around the issues. But how I feel about it, even though you may say create your own, how I feel about it personally, you're a terrorist and you shouldn't exist. That's how I feel about it. I would tell them that to their face. Don't bring me on South African TV with somebody from Afriforum. I say, you're a freaking terrorist. That's exactly what you are. I know you. You cannot exist with Black people because you want them subjugated. Matter of fact, you figured out ways to put Black people back in apartheid. I know you. See, like I said, that would be some good TV, wouldn't it?
You're actually right, because there's a very strong Black activist in this country who was put on the national television station with such a person, and live on television, he said, "Let me walk out of the studio." And I think you remind me of him. He said, "I'm not going to sit in this forum with somebody like you." And yeah, I do respect that view. And you're correct. You know what I think Afriforum has done across the world is that they've spread the message of white genocide in this country, which is fake news, that white people are being killed. So they are a very dangerous propaganda machine, but they've got a lot of financial muscle, and they're supported by white people who are very intent on looking after their own interests. And as I've said, if that ethos of looking after yourself is infused into the Black community, they would be in a different state, I believe.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I totally agree. Well, Kim, let people know, how they can get your book, No White Lies, and how they can get possibly in contact with you on social media, your website.
Well, thank you. And it's been such a wonderful, wonderful hour with you. And I really appreciate that. My book, No White Lies, is on Amazon at actually a very reasonable cost. I'm trying to just make sure that people can access it. So, and my Twitter handle is @KimHeller3. And I would really welcome any engagement. And I do hope that you share this video, because I think there'd be a lot of interest from South Africans for the kind of conversations that you have, which we are not fortunate enough to have in this country. Thank you.
Oh, well, definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you go to the Twitter handles, buy the book, No White Lies. And Kim, we are definitely welcome, this kind of conversation. We've built our platform on these type of conversations. I just want to see the liberation of Black people worldwide. And I know, I've said this before, not all white people are on that, with white supremacy. Some of them are very disgusted by it. But unfortunately, due to the majority thinking that attacks people like you and try to keep you in a hole where you can't say much, or even some of the sellouts in our own community may attack you. But I say, if that's how you feel and you keep pressing on, keep writing books, keep doing interviews, and the fight continues.
Did you know that you have a powerful shadow government ready to give you assistance on earth? It's your royal bloodline. Vicki Dillard here, aka Goddess Guru. I'm doing it again. Your Ancestors Webinar Part 3. This time, we're going to be discussing both your terrestrial and celestial lineage. Go to my website today, onpurposewithvicky.com. This is for the whole wide world.